Today is a very special day for the museum. 6th of September 2024 is our 10th anniversary of our opening. So happy birthday to the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum, and congratulations to Rob for putting together a world-class collection. Today we're looking at one of the newest exhibits within the museum, the A27M Cromwell. This vehicle was lovingly restored by Carl and Isaac Mark Lou Brown and Adrian Barrell from C&C Military Services. Development of this family of vehicles started off in about mid-1940. Prototypes come through in about March of 41 and then went into production in about January of 1942. This specific vehicle was built by British Electric in March of 1944. Across all three types of vehicles, including the Cavalier, the Centaur and the Cromwell, there was a little over 4,066 built. There was 6 different types of hull going from A through to F. This is a type D hull. What distinguishes a D from C is the periscope for the bow gunner, revised track guard design, and when we look at the engine deck, now we've got easier access to the radiators. So track adjustment generally done from the front, so you loosen that one off and the bar pushes against this lever here and that tightens the track. 5 sets of double road wheels. Now you'll notice that we've also got these holes, and that is mainly to displace mud. If it builds up, it'll literally just push it through those holes. I started off with about a 14-inch wide track. Later variants, including this, went to just over 15-inch wide track. Suspension is hidden behind these panels. This first panel, about 32 mil thick. Suspension sits behind there, and it's a helical spring. They sit on about a 70-degree angle, which incidentally is about the same as what the front glacis plate is. And then behind that again is a 14mm plate before we get into the fighting compartment of the vehicle. So all the suspension is hidden behind these plates. Front idler wheel made by Firebrand, which is an American company, and the size of the tyre is exactly the same as what is on the M3 and the M5 Stuarts. This is a vehicle that come in with increased armour compared to older vehicles. So if we look at the front plate here where the driver can look at, this is about 64mm thick, so it's at 90 degrees. As we come down, the original specifications for this front glacis plate here was 30mm thick. Now it's at a 70-degree angle, so the line of sight now is about 87mm. Lower plate, these again, according to model and time frame, started off at about 57mm thick, but also went up to about 76mm thick. 32mm on the side here. As we come up to the turret, these side plates are about 50mm thick, and the frontal plate here is about 64mm thick. So the engine is your Rolls-Royce Meteor. Which is an adaptation from the Merlin engine. So the only difference to that is they've taken the superchargers off and they've changed the oil scavenge system along with the cooling system. It's downrated to, depending on which resource you look at, between 540 and 600 horsepower, which will propel this vehicle at about 52 kilometres an hour. Have what's known as the Normandy cowling. So this deflects all the exhaust and if there's any backfire, flame out through this direction here. These are your smoke discharge of vehicle number 1 Mark 1s or smoke candles. So essentially you would have about 2 or 3 candles which would sit in these discharges, run a cable up through the driver's position. When he wanted to use them, he would pull the cable, the cover would come out, the smoke grenades would drop out, and then he would reverse over the smoke to give him that smoke screen out the front of his vehicles. Similar to what the Panzer IVs did with their smoke discharges on the back. They'd drop out and they'd reverse over. Main armour for the Cromwell initially started off as your 6-pounder anti-tank gun. The penetration rate of a 6-pounder could be about 78mm at about 500 yards. But when the Mark IVs come out, which this one is, they went to the 75mm gun. Now what that entailed was honing out this 6-pounder gun to 75mm, so then they can use the one-piece American ammunition. There's some good points and bad points about that. Firstly, the armour-piercing round had less penetrating power than the 6-pounder round, so it was about 68mm at 500 yards. But the high explosive round was considered to be excellent compared to what the 6-pounder used. The British actually liked the fact that it had a good HE round, so it was a dual-purpose gun. Sighting system on here is the number 43 Mark 1 telescope. Magnification of ×1 to ×3, and it's said to have a fairly good field of view of anywhere between sort of that 13 and 14 degrees. carried about 64 rounds on board, 2 Beezer 7.92 machine guns. So we've got one here for the bow gunner, and when the gun is mounted, he's just got a handle that he can quite easily move it around on the ball mount. This ball mount will give you a horizontal traverse of about 45 degrees, and in elevation we can get about 25 degrees. Coaxial machine gun mount, again it's a Beezer 7.92, so in all they're carrying close to about 5,000 rounds on board for this gun. So the markings we have on here, 1st Royal Tank Regiment, Desert Rats, belonging to the 22nd Armoured Brigade, given the census number of 189557. Adrian Barrell supplied us a lot of this information. He's done a lot of research into the history of this vehicle, including the name. When this vehicle landed on D-Day +1, it was commanded by Captain Philip Clapperton. He was the troop commander of 2 Troop A Squadron. The OC Major Bob Crisp, he was injured during North Africa, so he had to go through and get his wounds treated. Captain Clapperton would often go to the headquarters to command the squadron. Because this was in A Squadron, they all start with the letter A. So the 3 tanks in headquarters were known as "and we can do it," "and we know it," and "so do we." So when we come to this vehicle, it's ANUS, meant to represent "and us." So you had the 3 headquarter tanks and us. Now the simplified spelling of this was ANUS, so that didn't sound too good, so they changed it to ANNOUS. After the war, this vehicle was selected to be converted to a charioteer. It was sold on or around about the 16th of July 1958, and this went to Lebanon. It went to the PLO. They then used it against the Israelis in Operation Litani in about 1978. This area here is where it was knocked out by a heat round. Back in the 1980s, this vehicle was recovered by an engineering firm, brought back to England. Captain Clapperton actually worked for a steel merchant where a lot of the Cromwells ended up after the war. There's still a fair few Cromwells surviving around the world today. However, we believe that this one in particular has significant history behind it. It survived the war. It went to a charioteer, fought the Israelis, and it's come back to England. It was rebuilt by Carl and his company. This is an excellent running example to have in the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum.